Welcome, everyone, to our Wednesday edition of our Packers News live chat. Alongside Ryan Wood, I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers return to practice today as they're gearing up for their Sunday matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. We'll bring you the latest on today's injury report, plus we'll also take a look ahead at this weekend's game against the Vikings. Before we do that, as always, you can be a part of our conversation. If you're over on Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube, leave us a question, leave us a thought that you're having. Ryan and I will get to some of those toward the end of our conversation today. The injury gods must be smiling upon the Green Bay Packers because two players that are currently on injured reserve, wide receiver Allen Lazard and inside linebacker Christian Kirksey, returned to practice for the first time in about 3 weeks. They have 21 days to practice before they either have to be placed on the 53-man roster or on season-ending injured reserve. When can Packers fans expect to see Lazard and Kirksey back in action?
Yeah, it could be sooner than later. It depends on how they do once they get back on the field here and how they feel tomorrow and the next day, of course. But they didn't waste much time with Economia St. Brown and Kamal Martin once they got back from IR. They were pretty quickly into that window, activated on the 53. And there's no question both of those guys returning would be a big help for this Packers team on both sides of the ball. You've got some young inside linebackers now with Chris Barnes and Kamal Martin back. Christian Kirksey would really complete that group. And then Allen Lazard, this offense is really looking for that secondary piece in the passing game, the consistent guy behind Devontae Adams. Allen Lazard hasn't played since that breakout performance in New Orleans. So it's been a minute, and that's to not be able to build on the momentum of that game has got to be something that's been frustrating for him. So, you're right, Olivia. Two really good pieces of news for this team, and two guys that, if all goes well, you could be seeing them sooner than later.
Those weren't the only two returners to today's practice. Left tackle David Bakhtiari, safety Darnell Savage, and running back Tyler Ervin all returned to practice today after missing the last couple of weeks here and there. But there were some others that did not return to practice today that the Packers sure would have liked to have seen return, including running back Aaron Jones, who's dealing with a calf injury, and then also cornerback Kevin King, who has been sidelined for the last couple of weeks with a quad injury. The Packers have had some success at depth at each of their positions. However, running back Jamal Williams had 114 all-purpose yards against the Texans, plus he scored a touchdown. Cornerback Josh Jackson, who started in place of Kevin King, he didn't allow a single touchdown all day. How confident are the Packers in their depth all across the roster?
Yeah, they've shown a lot of good depth, and they might use it this week, because keep in mind, Olivia, that obviously it's Vikings week and all attention is on that, but they have a short turnaround to the West Coast coming up next week with that Thursday game in San Francisco. So a guy like Aaron Jones, who you want naturally, even if he's healthy, you want to keep the wear and tear off of him. Well, he does have that mild calf strain. Matt LaFleur made it sound like they're not going to rush him back on the field. If they need another week with Aaron Jones missing, then they're open to that. He's not going to be back until he's fully healthy. And you wonder what kind of a factor that short week coming up would be for a guy like that. Kevin King, it's probably the same way. I mean, Kevin King's a guy that has struggled to stay healthy really throughout his career, other than last season. Last season, he played 15 games and was healthy. He was healthy early this season, but he's a guy with that injury history that you're not going to be inclined to just throw out there if he's not ready to go. So both of those guys, it could be another week, could be this week. We'll have to see how the week of practice goes.
Additionally, kicker Mason Crosby did not practice today. He popped up on the injury report with a left calf injury and a back injury. What are the Packers' backup plan at kicker?
Pray that he's healthy, and if not, get a guy to come in off the street. I mean, that's what teams do. You only have one kicker on the 53, so first and foremost, certainly if you're the Packers, you want Mason Crosby to be good to go. But it's going to be interesting to see how that progresses throughout the week.
Let's take a look ahead at this weekend's game against the Vikings. These are two teams that could not be in more different spots in their seasons just in general. The Packers are 5-1. The Vikings are 1-5. Aaron Rodgers has a league-high adjusted quarterback rating of 85.9. Kirk Cousins is at 45.9. Very different. Cousins also leads the league in interceptions with 10. how much better or worse are the Vikings than their stats currently show?
Everyone on the Packers from Matt LaFleur on down has really emphasized this week that this Vikings team is a good team, that you cannot consider this one-win Vikings team to be anything other than a good team capable of, in Matt LaFleur's words, whipping this Packers team if they're not prepared to play. And there's good reason for that. I mean, any team in the NFL opponent is capable of winning any week. There's a lot of parity in this league. With that said, that's not a message that you have to hammer in over and over again against an actual good team. Usually it's the bad teams that you have to remind yourself, hey, this team can actually beat you. It is actually possible that at the end of 60 minutes, they might have more points. So certainly this Vikings team is down. With that said, they played the Titans tough. They played the Seahawks tough. They lost those 2 games by 2 points, 1 point apiece. So there is some evidence that they can point to, this coaching staff, to say, hey, this team can beat you. It's not just lip service. But there's a lot of lip service. You don't say this stuff against good teams. You don't need to say it against good teams.
One of the position groups that is the most banged up on the Vikings roster right now is at cornerback. Cornerbacks Holton Hill and Mike Hughes did not participate in today's practice. Chris Boyd was limited in today's practice, and rookie corner Cameron Dantzler was placed on COVID-19 IR. Regardless of whether or not these corners are all healthy and available on Sunday, they may be limited in the game. How can the Packers take advantage of a potentially limited secondary?
By throwing it to Davante Adams a lot. And that's, what they did week 1. And it's certainly something that could be in the cards again this week. Look, you have a hard time thinking the Vikings are going to come out and just single-man cover Davante Adams ad nauseum like they did 7 weeks ago. I mean, it's hard to imagine. What's the definition of insane? Continue to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, right? So I would think that they're going to rotate coverages a lot more to Davante Adams than you saw week 1. But either way, he could be a big part of this game plan this week.
The game plan, Davante Adams should be a part of it. That would be a wise thing to do. If Davante Adams is on your fantasy roster out there, I'm not a huge fantasy person, but perhaps you may want to have him active and off the bench this weekend against the Vikings. Let's flip it over to Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube for some of your questions. As expected, we've got a lot of questions today as the trade deadline rapidly approaches on November 3rd. If you're Davante Adams, in fact, you might not know when the trade deadline is. He said so today. He doesn't really pay attention to exactly when that falls. He's just focused on football. However, for your information, trade deadline November 3rd. Packers may or may not be active. There's been some reports out there, one of which being, we'll start here with John. John asks specifically about Texans wide receiver Will Fuller, who the Packers got an up-close look at last weekend. John asks, scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it that Will Fuller would come to the Packers in a trade? There was a report out there that the Packers inquired about Fuller. Ryan, how likely is it that the Packers would be interested in a player like him?
Anytime we get reports like this, Olivia, I think the first question is there a natural connection? In this case, yes, there is. Matt LaFleur was the quarterback's coach at Notre Dame when Will Fuller was a receiver. So Matt LaFleur knows Will Fuller very well. They you move on to the need, right? Actual connection need. Yeah, they've needed receiver help forever. I mean, it's been in perpetuity that this team has needed receiver help, and it hasn't come. So there's obvious need. Matt LaFleur last week really sung Will Fuller's praises. Now, that I don't put too much stock into that because what else is he going to say? And on top of that, he's not just an opponent, but he's someone that he knows. So it's not surprising that he would say nice things about Will Fuller. But in this case, it's not hard to believe either that he might have a high opinion of Will Fuller. So it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like Matt LaFleur said, and you're right. Davante Adams said that he doesn't know when the deadline is, but Davante Adams also did not say, no, we're good here. We don't need anybody. He said, hey, yeah, he's always open to roster expansion and getting better. And if that means, he said, bringing in a receiver, or he went on, I think, the inside linebacker or whatnot, but receiver is the first position he mentioned. If it means bringing in a receiver, okay. And Matt LaFleur, when asked today, didn't say, yes, this team needs help. He said that he's got confidence in his guys. He also didn't rule out something happening. He said if Brian Gutekunst sees a deal out there that he likes, he's sure that Brian Gutekunst will go out and make that move. And what we've seen from Brian Gutekunst is that he's not Ted Thompson. He's a guy that will go out there and make that move. So it's got to be the right deal. It's got to, there's a lot of factors that go into play, but this is not a team that's just throwing their hands up being like, nah, we're good here. This is a team that certainly sounds like it's open to the possibility of an addition.
Thank you, John, for your question. Would the Packers be open to an addition like A.J. Green? Brandon wants to know, what would it take for wideout A.J. Green to come to the Packers, the Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver, compared to a player like Will Fuller? How likely is it the Packers would be interested in a player like A.J. Green?
No more than a mid-round pick. He's on the wrong side of 30. A.J. Green's obviously a tremendous receiver, has had a tremendous career, but he's aging at this point. He doesn't have the youth that a Will Fuller has. So because of that, and these trades are the compensation, the value is built on projection and not, it's just like free agency and not past production. So, maybe more affordable, certainly no more than a mid-round pick, but he'd come in and immediately be the second best receiver on this team. So if you can do that, and I haven't looked at his contract offhand, but if you can make your team better and he would make this team better, then it's a move that's worth considering.
Thank you, Brandon, for your question. David points out the Packers need both wideout help and help at defensive end. Between the two position groups, Ryan, which one ranks higher as more of a priority for the Packers?
That's a great question. It's 1A and 1B. I would say that the defensive line running mate with Kenny Clark would be the number one priority on this team. And the reason, I guess the tiebreaker here is that the offense is better than the defense. And you can, whether or not that should be the way it is a fair question considering all the assets that this team has put into the defensive side of the ball in free agency and the draft. There's a lot of money and a lot of premium picks on that defense, and yet it is still second fiddle to the offense this season. There's no question about that. Will the offense have enough juice without adding the receiver to win a Super Bowl? It remains to be seen. They could. They certainly could. I mean, what the offense has done against a lot of bad defenses this season has been impressive. But in terms of what's the quickest way to make this team better, Olivia, I really do think that getting a number two alongside Kenny Clark would go a long way.
Speaking of defensive ends, potential targets for the Packers on defense, Ryan, we spoke about this a little bit last week. Southwest Florida Packers fan club, good to see you, asks about J.J. Watt, the Texans defensive end. How likely is it the Packers would show any interest in Watt, who's getting up there and he's awfully expensive?
Natural connection. He's a Wisconsin guy. Need, just talked about it. They need a guy that line up. I mean, think about J.J. Watt lining up next to Kenny Clark with the Smiths, with Rashawn Gary as a rotational guy. That's a pretty fierce defensive front that you have there. And it certainly is a lot more fierce than a lot of developing guys, limited pass rush guys lining up to Kenny Clark, which is what they have now. It makes a lot of sense. Now he's owed $17.5 million next year. There is no proration. So if they released him after the season, they would owe him no money. With that said, what are the chances that they're going to want to release J.J. Watt after trading a premium pick for him next season? Not high. I mean, it's going to take a premium pick to get J.J. Watt. You want him more than a half year. So there's some considerations that are more than, hey, does this make your team better this season, that the Packers have got to take into account. But would he make them better this season? Yes. Is he a guy that's worth considering? Yes.
A little bit complicated, however, not totally out there for J.J. Watt potentially to come to Green Bay. Thank you, Southwest Florida Packers fan club. Katie, flipping it back to our conversation earlier about Cameron Dantzler being placed on COVID-19 IR. Katie asks, with the Vikings player going on that list, did the Vikings close down their facility? If that spreads, hypothetically, what happens with Sunday's game? The Vikings, as far as we know, have not shut down their facility. It's important to keep in mind the COVID-19 IR list does not necessarily mean that the player tested positive for COVID-19. It could also mean they came into contact with someone that tested positive. So that's something worth keeping in mind. Like I said, as far as we know right now, the Vikings have not shut down their facility, and there has not been an impact on Sunday's game. Ryan, anything else to add to that?
Nope, I think you got the COVID stuff covered.
Sweet. All right, Katie, thank you so much for your question. Let's take a question here from Bryson. Bryson asks, do you think that the San Francisco 49ers game is going to really show how we have developed from last year? The Packers are on the road this upcoming week, not this week, against the San Francisco 49ers. A short week, a long West Coast trip. We know how much the Packers love a good West Coast trip. They struggled mightily on the West Coast last season, lost both games against the 49ers last season, and they lost the game against the Chargers. 0-3 on the West Coast. Ryan, how much of a test is this upcoming week's game against the 49ers going to be for the current Packers?
Yeah, well, it's a bit, but it's not the same 49ers team. They don't have Nick Bosa. They've had a ton of injuries. Mostert, I believe, is on IR. It's just not the same team personnel-wise. Schematically, yeah. I mean, it'll be very interesting, I think, to see how this Packers defense goes against that Kyle Shanahan outside zone scheme that they struggled so mightily with last season. There's no question that there's still some talent on the 49ers, but it's not a complete team. So I think it says more if they don't play well against them than if they do. If they do, this is a team that they should play very well against, because the Packers, they have a relatively full complement of their players, whereas the 49ers have really been hit hard by the injury bug.
Thank you, Bryson, for your question. Let's go to Andrew here over on Facebook. Andrew says, of the upcoming free agents, who would take priority to re-sign for the Packers? Running back Aaron Jones, left tackle David Bakhtiari. Ryan, I'm putting you in between a rock and a hard place of 2021 free agents. Both running back Aaron Jones and left tackle David Bakhtiari are set to become free agents in 2021. Who is the most important for the Packers to re-sign first?
Well, the answer is yes, first of all. Yes. But if you have to choose one, you look at what position they play, right? I mean, they're both really talented players. They're both dynamic players. One of them is a left tackle. And for that, there's not enough good left tackles in this league. It's a lot easier to replace a left tackle a running back than it is to replace a left tackle. I don't think there's any question about that at this game, at this level. With that said, it's not like, hey, you can just put anyone in the backfield and they're Aaron Jones. It's obviously not the case, but I would imagine the priority would be Bakhtiari and then Aaron Jones. But the answer is yes. Like, who do you resign? Yes, both.
Can they have them all? Is that an option? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see if they do any restructuring, any cap casualties going forward, because as we know, the salary cap, the minimum is going to be $175 million. That's as low as it can possibly be, which is considerably lower than it would typically be in a non-COVID-19 year. Something to keep in mind going forward. Thank you, Andrew, for your question. That is going to do it for us tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back tomorrow with yet another live stream. So if we did not get to your question, don't worry, just come back and we'll try to get to you once again. For Ryan Wood, I am Olivia Reiner. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.